A reading from the second book of Kings. Naaman, the army commander of the king of Aram, was highly esteemed and respected by his master, for through him the Lord had brought victory to Aram. But valiant as he was, the man was a leper. Now the Arameans had captured in a raid on the land of Israel a little girl who became the servant of Naaman's wife. "If only my master would present himself to the prophet in Samaria," she told her mistress, "he would cure him of his leprosy." Naaman went and told his lord just what the slave girl from the land of Israel had said. "Go," said the king of Aram, "I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So Naaman set out, taking along 10 silver talents, 6,000 gold pieces, and 10 festal garments. To the king of Israel he brought the letter, which read, "With this letter I am sending you my servant Naaman to you, that you may cure him of his leprosy." When he read the letter, the king of Israel tore his garments and exclaimed, "Am I a god with power over life and death, that this man should send someone to me to be cured of leprosy? Take note, you can see he is only looking for a quarrel with me." When Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his garments, he sent word to the king, "Why have you torn your garments? Let him come to me and find out that there is a prophet in Israel." Naaman came with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. The prophet sent him the message, "Go and wash 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will heal and you will be clean." But Naaman went away angry, saying, I thought that he would surely come out and stand there to invoke the Lord his God, and would move his hand over the spot and thus cure the leprosy. "Are not the rivers in Damascus and Abana and Pharpar better than all the waters in Israel? Could I not wash in them and be cleansed?" With this he turned about in anger and left. But his servants came up and reasoned with him. "My father," they said, "if the prophet had told you to do something extraordinary, would you not have done it? All the more now, since he said to you, 'Wash and be clean,' you should do as he said." So Naaman went down and plunged in the Jordan 7 times at the word of the man of God. His flesh became again clean like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. He returned with his whole retinue to the man of God. On his arrival, he stood before him and said, "Now I know that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel." The word of the Lord.
Athirst is my soul for the living God. When shall I go and behold the face of God? Athirst is my soul for the living God. When shall I go and behold the face of God? As the deer longs for running waters, so my soul longs for you, O God. Athirst is my soul for the living God. When shall I go and behold the face of God? Athirst is my soul for God the living God. When shall I go and behold the face of God? Athirst is my soul for the living God. When shall I go and behold the face of God? Send forth your light and your fidelity. They shall lead me on, and bring me to your holy mountain, to your dwelling place. Athirst is my soul for the living God. When shall I go and behold the face of God? Then will I go into the altar of God, the God of my gladness and joy. Then will I give you thanks upon the harp, O God, my God. Athirst is my soul for the living God. When shall I go and behold the face of God? Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ, King of endless glory. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ, King of endless glory. The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus said to the people in the synagogue at Nazareth, Amen, amen, I say to you, no prophet is accepted in his own native place. Indeed, I tell you, there were many widows in Israel in the days of Elijah when the sky was closed for 3.5 years, and a severe famine spread over the entire land. It was to none of these that Elijah was sent, but only to a widow in Zarephath in the land of Sidon. Again, there were many lepers in Israel during the time of Elisha the prophet, yet not one of them was cleansed, but only Naaman the Syrian. When the people in the synagogue heard this, they were all filled with fury. They rose up, drove him out of the town, and led him to the brow of the hill, on which their town had been built, to hurl him down headlong. But he passed through the midst of them and went away. The Gospel of the Lord. You can tell it's getting to be allergy season, so I'm a little stuffy this morning. Just some comments about this first reading from the second book of Kings. This is the story about Naaman the Syrian. Naaman, what was the illness that he had? He was leprous. He had leprosy, right? So one of the interesting things about this story is that when you understand the context of it, you see that this was basically a story that some of us might all be able to relate to. It was a story of Naaman being humbled, essentially. Right? Naaman was this great army commander for the king of Aram. Right? He had done battle with Israel and other nations, and because of his valiancy in war, he was very well known and he was very famous. And yet, despite how valiant Naaman was, he still had an issue. He had a weakness that he didn't really want anybody to know about. Naaman was a leper. As you know from your experience of hearing the Bible stories and reading the Bible, leprosy was a pretty serious thing. Leprosy was one of the things that could turn you into an outcast. Right? So Naaman, one of the people on the very top of the social hierarchy, right, had this humiliating disease. And to further humble himself, one of the slaves that he had captured in his wars, she is the one who suggested to him that if he wanted to be cured of leprosy, then he needed to go to the prophet in Israel, in Samaria. And now keep in mind, Naaman was not an Israelite. Right? He was from Syria, which was one of the arch nemeses of Israel. So not only is this slave girl giving him advice, but she's telling him to go and basically present himself before his enemy to be cured of the leprosy. Imagine how humbling and humiliating it would have been for Naaman to send this letter to the opposing nation, his arch enemy, saying that he wished to come and be cleansed of his leprosy. And not only humiliating to speak to his arch enemy, but also to reveal that he had this humiliating disease. The king of Israel, as you can tell, when the letter was read, the king of Israel panicked, basically. Oh gosh, this must be some sort of trap or something. This person from Syria is coming and wanting to be healed, but if he's not healed, then he's going to be upset, and maybe there's going to be more war. So the king of Israel panicked. Finally, the prophet Elisha heard what was going on and told Naaman to come. And then the last bit of humility, right? When Naaman presents himself before the prophet Elisha, right? This man Naaman, who probably didn't even believe in God, or at least not the God of Israel, presented himself to this prophet Elisha, basically expecting Elisha to be like a sort of magician, right? Like maybe to cast some sort of spell and Naaman would be healed. But instead, Elisha told him to go and wash in the river Jordan 7 times, which might not seem that humbling unless you actually ever been to the Holy Land. Right? The river Jordan, despite its prominence in salvation history, is not really much of a river. It actually feels like more like a stream. And it's also very dirty, right? It's very narrow. It's probably not any wider than from this ambo to the end of the altar. It's a very small stream. And so here's this great and famous man humbling himself, coming to this opposing nation, presenting himself to this famous prophet, and all he's told is to go and take a bath in this small, tiny river. It's all about this story of how Naaman is constantly, every step of the way, being humiliated and humbling himself. And of course, after he does wash in the River Jordan, his leprosy is cured. And because of the healing of his leprosy, he recognizes that Elisha truly is a man of God, and the God that he worships is truly the God of all the earth. Right? That's the key part of the story. Right? All of these times that Naaman is humbled and humiliated, eventually they're leading him to the place where he can come to know the one true God. There's a great spiritual lesson for us in that, in this whole story of Naaman. Again, all of us have different strengths, different gifts and talents. And it's very tempting to just want to present ourselves like the great man Naaman. And yet if we truly search ourselves and search our hearts and search our souls, all of us have something inside of us that we're ashamed of or that holds us back, that we don't want anyone else to know about. Maybe a constant stumbling block we experience with our own character. And the story of Naaman helps remind us that sometimes even those things, the things we hate the most about ourselves, might be the very thing that God is using to keep us humbled and to bring us closer to Him.